Assalamu alaikum. Hello, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everyone. Thank you for joining CVU's October webinar, Invoking Professionalism. Dr. Shabih Zaidi will be hosting this webinar, and he doesn't need any introduction. We all know who he is. But just to cover anyone who is new here, Dr. Shabih Zaidi is a former ENT professor and dean. He was a WHO consultant, founding dean for American University of Barbados, honorary vice chancellor of Fatima University, New Jersey, founding chancellor of Al Sadiq University. He has done many, many webinars and workshops and written many books. Some of the latest books are the Global Medical Education that is in process right now with Springer Nature, and then the Encyclopedia of Islamic Medical Ethics that we all know and love, and then the Modern Medical Education that is under print. With all of that, Dr. Shabih, the floor is yours. Please take over. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakina. Good afternoon, good morning, good evening. So it's London, it's 2:30 in the afternoon. It's a foul day. It's a lot of stormy weather today, for whatever reason. Anyway, welcome to this webinar. Now, we've talked a great deal about professionalism in the last couple of years. The reason being that I believe that in the triangle of education, there's knowledge, skills, and behavior. That word behavior doesn't suit. Attitude doesn't suit either. So when you talk about knowledge and skills in the triangle, you're running two parallel tracks without interacting with each other. In order to mix them together, knowledge and skills running parallel, they find they should be balanced, they should also mix with each other. And the junction between the two is what's called professionalism. I don't like this word behavior or attitude or that. And at all forums, I've been saying that knowledge, skills, and professionalism. Professionalism is an important thing we should emphasize. And that is the reason we've had several talks on professionalism. One was very famously given by Professor Gauhar Wajid. There was one by Professor Yadullah Zarizad. There I gave a couple. But this time I've chosen a different topic, invoking professionalism. And the reason for that is, and Sakina would help me in the digital part of it later on, the reason for choosing this word, it's not moving, so Sakina. Yes, yes. So it's because I read this wonderful article by Edmund Pellegrino. He was an American-Italian professor, and he was the only medical educator that I've come across who believed that professionalism should not be confined only to simple things like, talking to be a good doctor, etc. But more than that, he actually believed, just like me, that medical ethics and philosophy should be part of medical curriculum. Humanities should be incorporated. Yesterday, I was giving a talk to the CHPE students, and I mentioned there very categorically that although we give a lot of credit to a famous educator by the name of Abraham Flexner, but we forget that he was also, in a way, I'm not being biased, but frankly, he was against humanities. He compiled all the sciences together, and in 5 years, he wanted to make a doctor who should be a super scientist. But what he forgot was that a doctor should also first be a human being. And that part of humanity is what he missed out completely. And I believe that Edmund Pellegrino started this movement again, that professionalism should be something, a combination of virtues, and virtues are important. And this is an article that I recently came across, which inspired me greatly. And I thought we'll talk about invoking professionalism based on the teaching of Edmund. And please read him, Edmund Pellegrino. Not many people know of him, but he was a remarkable teacher in the United States of America. And this is an article published in Mount Sinai Journal of Medicine, where he talked about professionalism, defining what is professionalism, then talked about profession and the virtues of a good physician. Because in order to be a good professional, you have to be a good physician. And in order to be a good physician, you also have to be a virtue-based physician. That is, should have certain virtues. And I will pick up from there and talk briefly about it. This is his saying in right in the introduction of that particular article that I read, and I've just referred to. He says that there is widespread concern today among conscientious physicians, educators, and the general public that medicine is becoming deprofessionalized, and I couldn't agree more with that statement. That the profession is losing its commitment to the kind of character traits requisite for protection of the welfare and interests of patients. And remember, the first and foremost thing in medical profession is the care of the patient. So if you do not take care of the patient because you're lacking certain human values, empathy, sympathy, various characters that we'll talk about in a moment, virtues of different characters, being good and kind and compassionate, etc., then you're not being professional. And this is what he said, that the profession, and I could say, I'm sure you also agree with it, that the profession is being deprofessionalized because we are losing the human traits. And now with the introduction of machines and everything that's coming up, that we'll talk later towards the end of this particular session, we feel that, that the human element, the touch, human touch in professionalism is lost. And this noble profession, which is always noble, and that's the reason we all joined, it's a noble profession, is changing into a trade. Nothing wrong with a trade. If you're a plumber, we respect it. If you're a carpenter, we respect it, everything. But a professional goes through so much rigorous education, training, learning, etc., falling to the level of a low trade is something which is definitely demeaning, if not worse. And I think we should avoid that. Now, I will briefly summarize the applied professionalism that he has mentioned in his article, and all of these things that I'm sure you're familiar with them, nothing new. The priority is patient's welfare. And in order to place a patient's safety, you have to have the certain parameters that you have to be kept. Human dignity, most important factor. Anything above even patient care is a human dignity. Patient should be treated, or human beings should be treated with dignity. Then the important thing is that you want to treat the patient for well-being, and this is what's called beneficence in terms of medical ethics, and avoiding harm, which is called non-maleficence. That's a part of professionalism. And above all, personal or institutional interest. I think what is important is that if you're not loyal to yourself and you're to an institution, that loyalty plays a very important role, because we see all the times happening in America, mostly in other countries as well, that loyalty is lost. I mean, in the British institutions, still we have loyalty. Once you join, I joined NHS God knows how many years ago, and I'm still loyal to it. People are against it for whatever reason, but I'm still, so loyalty is important. But in the process of applying professionalism, the priority is the patient's welfare. Nothing beats that. Then this is the thing that I've been harking for a long, long time, that medical ethics should be integral part of medical education. It should form a part and parcel longitudinally and horizontally in all curricula that are there, whether contextual, international, or whatever curriculum you're using, medical ethics should be a part of it. Because if you do not follow the code of conduct, which is given to you by your oath that you've taken, Hippocratic oath or Islamic oath or Christian oath or whatever, you must follow a certain code of conduct. And yesterday I mentioned in my talk to CHPE that the first code of conduct was given by Hammurabi, who was a goodly ruler of Babylonian era several thousand years ago. And that code of conduct is still applicable. And then, of course, Hippocrates code that all of you know, it's called Hippocratic Oath. Then confidentiality is important. Most important thing in patient management is confidentiality, particularly in these days when you have cyber attacks and cyber threats and cyber insecurities become. Recently, we had problems even in the MNS, which is a superstore. The data was hijacked. And I think there was somebody else, which I can't remember, 2 or 3 major stores that stopped functioning. And this cyber threat has become very, very significant thing. It happened to NHS some 10 years ago, that the data was hacked and some particular, I don't want to name the country, but it was hacked, and then that person, that group of people wanted the NHS to pay a certain amount of money, like ransom money. And during the discussion of professionalism, honesty is important, because if you're not honest to yourself and to your profession and to your patient, then honesty plays a very, very significant role. And in the modern days of interprofessional education, honesty between the groups of people, your colleagues, your seniors, your juniors, your peers, you have to be honest and fair. But above all, respect the patient and maintain confidentiality. Then you must this is another important thing, competence. You must have lifelong, and pedagogy is the word for it, which I used yesterday in my discussion. Lifelong learning is important. Pedagogy, you're familiar with the word. Everybody knows pedagogy is. Andragogy, which was introduced by a chap called Knowles, Knowles. Not many people know his name, but he introduced andragogy some 30, 40 years ago. And that is becoming more and more common these days. I mean, adult education is a very, very important factor. All of us going through that process. And pedagogy is lifelong learning, that you have to continue to learn throughout your life. And the new technology, a new term that's come up in the last maybe one and a half years, called technogogy, that you have pedagogy, andragogy, and combined with technogogy, technology that's combined together, that's called technogogy. Modern practice of medicine is evidence-based, and a new terminology that has come up, that was introduced by Professor Madalena Patricio in one of our webinars. She's from Portugal, a great educator. It's called evidence-based education. Evidence-based education, which is a new terminology, and I'll ask her to come and do another webinar sometimes. Part of a professional character or career is that you must maintain your professional status, continued professional development. This is a part of the activity that we're doing informally, that you have to maintain your professional status by attending courses, workshops, lectures, whatever. Every country has certain modus operandi to maintain CPD. Like in the UK, the General Medical Council makes sure that we do at least 25 or sometimes 27 workshops, seminars, and courses. And then we go through a certain rigorous exercise every year of appraisal and audit before we can continue to practice. So that is an important factor in professionalism. Another important thing is accountability, which is unfortunately which lacks in many countries. It's important that whatever decision you make in terms of patient care, you are answerable to somebody. You're answerable to your senior, you're answerable to your authority where you work in the institution, and the licensing body. And that accountability is important, because if you do not have check and balance, then chances are that you might go wrong. And it happens all the time. Nothing wrong with going wrong. Everybody goes wrong. There's nobody you can say that is not committed a mistake. But the important thing is, the moment you find and you feel that you've committed a mistake, accept the responsibility, report to your reporting officer, go back to the desk, learn the techniques again, or whatever mistakes, remove them and come back and continue with your professional work. Now, empathy must be differentiated from sympathy. Empathy is like, you stand in somebody else's shoes and feel the pain and discomfort. Sympathy is where you sit more like sitting on the higher altar. Empathy is important. You must observe empathy in all your professions, activities, and compassion is part of professional activity. Remember, there are 4 cardinal rules of Platonic virtues. 4 cardinal rules of Platonic virtues. First is courage. Second is compassion. The third is continuous professional development. And fourth is honesty, integrity. And of course, most important of all is accountability. Transparency, transparency. That is what Plato said. So those virtues are universal, and you have to adapt and understand those virtues are applicable to all of us. You must understand patient's perspective, communicate kindly and clearly. We have a workshop coming up, not workshop, a lecture coming up next week on communication skills with Suchita Dantikar, and I'll try to cover up the clinical side. She'll talk about the educational activities. You're welcome. I don't know whether you can join or not, but it will be available on our YouTube channel. Sakina will probably kindly upload it. So important thing is offer emotional support to the patient. Sometimes, the patients come with some, worrying. Most of the patients who come, they are worried, of course, and that's part of your character, professional conduct, that you should offer emotional support. And the other attributes are important, which in terms of diversity, this is a difficult thing in certain countries, but in the UK and USA and many other countries, diversity is mandatory. I mean, you cannot create any bias or likes or dislikes based upon gender or transgenderism or LGBTQ, whatever that's all those things. Diversity is important. Provide care without bias. Avoid any kind of differences, your cultural, your social, your religious, individual, avoid all kind of bias. Treat the patient as a human being. And when you treat the patient as a human being, first and foremost attribute is dignity. Human dignity is above all. You treat the patient with empathy, everything that I mentioned, but more important, that dignity, and that is an important factor to remember. Interprofessional education and teaching has become a regular feature. We promote teamwork and collaboration. We should engage our colleagues across disciplines and at the same level. Nobody should be at a higher. I mean, that's a different thing, respect and dignity, everything between profession. But when you talk to a patient, like in private discussion, like MDT, for example, you have to be at par. And should be opened across disciplines to optimize the patient's outcome, because nothing is more important than the patient's welfare. Then it's important that the communication that you do, whether between your colleagues or maintain your record, etc., should be clear, respectful, transparent, and family and fair. Everybody should be with honesty, integrity, empathy, and respect and dignity. And you must uphold boundaries, maintain an appropriate professional distance without blurring any relationships. What is important is that the professionalism should give you a certain status in the society. It gives you a status because you're a dignified person. You're a dignified person because you're knowledgeable. And knowledge, skills combined together with professional attitude is what you have to develop. If you do not have the professional values, then probably you're lacking certainty. You may be a very good, if you're a skilled surgeon, for example, fine, but you should also be a knowledgeable person. A person who has knowledge and no skills is a nerd. A person who has no skills and no knowledge is a technician. So you don't want to have that. You want to have a combination, and the crossover between the two is what's called the professionalism. That is important. Then advocate for public support policies, initiatives that improve healthcare, access, equity, and equality. And I think I've discussed many times difference between equity, equality, and equality. But this is not the time to discuss. Equity basically means, just very in simple words, equity means that you give a person what he needs. Equality is you generalize, you distribute your resources across board. But in situations where their services are expanding and such resources are limited, equity is better than equality. But it's a matter of debate that probably we'll do it some other time. So the summary of attributes that are important for professionalism is intellectual fidelity, honesty and integrity, courage with compassion. And these are universal. These are far above and beyond any in teaching, religious, etc., etc. I mean, who can deny justice? Practical life is a very important attribute. It's a pillar of ethics in all things, cross-culture, whether it's a global ethics or religious ethics. Justice is the universal pillar. So if you have these factors like intellectual fidelity, you're competent, you know your profession, you're honest, and you have integrity and courage, and you show compassion to the patient, you have benevolence and truthfulness, and avoiding harm, non-maleficence, and you do everything with justice. Justice should be the pillar of your life. If it's justice that is there in your life, then you're a good professional person. But the question is that when you talk theoretically, all these are wonderful. How do you invoke these attributes to be in a health professional? One way that I have mentioned this many times in the past, I've also gone through the virtue-based physician or religious basis, but this is the talk which is secular. It's about all religious faiths, etc. How do you invoke, how do you inculcate professionalism invoke professionalism and the attributes that are mentioned in a physician? Well, the answer is one way to develop is to develop a virtue-based physician. But what is a virtue-based physician? That is what we'll discuss here. For the virtue-based physician, the relationship with the patient could not be a contract. Or this is a beautiful statement that I picked up from Dr. Pellegrino's paper. That is, these days what's happening, that the patient comes to you, you have to discuss everything, and this will go, and then we'll do this procedure. So you draw a contract. You draw a contract, you sign a contract. That is not right. Patient is not a client. Patient is not a subject. Patient is a patient, and you are a doctor, a health physician, or a health professional, nurse, or whatever. And that contract, drawing a contract, is like selling a commodity. Pellegrino doesn't. I don't like either. I think contract is a bad word. It's an understanding. There are various factors but you have to do that contract because of legal reasons, because that's what's happening these days. Litigation has become an important factor. So you have to draw out a contract, but contract is not the correct word. Treat the patient not as a commodity, but as a person, a family member. That is important. And I think if you move on, what is important is that your self-interest should be subdued. Patient's interest should take the higher altar. And that is important if you want to develop yourself as a virtue-based physician. You should also have professional identity. This is something that's come in the last 2-3 years. I've been talking about professionalism for about 10 years. Professional identity has come up in the recent times. There was a question of identity, that everybody has to have an identity, but professional identity is something new. And this actually came up when I was writing this chapter for the book called Global Medical Education, that the question came up, what is professional identity? Identity is defined in the Oxford Dictionary as defined as a set of characteristics or a description that distinguishes a person or thing from others. So you have a certain identity. You are recognized by your name, your cultural background, your color of skin, etc., etc. So you have a character, and that personal character is called personal identity. But professional identity is different. Professional identity is something that we'll discuss later on. I have invited Dr. Ali Tariq to come and talk about it. He sent me a wonderful, wonderful paper when I was writing the chapter on the 3-loop system of developing professional identity, and hopefully he'll join us later. Now, when the medical students enter professional medical school, all of us, when we entered, we had a certain idea that's called priori knowledge. Plato gave this concept that even a blind person has some concept of a color. So that priori knowledge is something that pre-exists in our system. So when you enter med school, you have an idea that you'll be wearing a white coat or you'll be carrying a stethoscope, etc., etc. That should be developed further, and that professional identity starts the moment you enter a medical school, and you have to cultivate it, develop it by experiential learning and critical thinking and reflections. And there are 3 loops which I thoroughly enjoyed when I read Dr. Ali Tariq's the paper that he sent me, and I've invited him to come in. Now, what is important, the early exposure, the transformation is shaped by formal curricula, clinical exposure, experience. I'm very fond of using this word, experiential learning. Knowledge combined with experiential learning leads to wisdom. Wisdom is more important than knowledge, more important than intelligence. Wisdom, what tells you how to walk on the right path, and that is where it tells you whether there's a ditch in front or straight path, etc., etc. These are dynamic expectations of modern healthcare, and this is important. At the core of it is the patient care. Remember, the fundamental principle of medical profession is patient care, and patient care with dignity. These are important things to remember. This is where I'd like to invite Ali Tariq. I'll read. Is Dr. Tariq here? Can you check, Sakina? Hello?
I don't see him.
Oh, dear.
Okay.
I requested him to come over. Anyway, so this is his. I've taken these particular lines from his particular paper. Professional identity, and this he's quoting some other scholars, some references are given. that professional identity formation is often constrained by the absence of deep reflective practices that drive ontological transformation. That is why I wanted them here. Ontological is epistemology. These are different words that people use. A fundamental shift in one's way of being rather than mere epistemological growth accumulation. That is, it's not the question of just becoming a physician or health professional because you have knowledge and skill, but you should also understand the complexities of human life, complexities of universe, and that is where the question of this philosophical being and knowing yourself. Being and knowing yourself. The famous philosopher Descartes, René Descartes, if you're not read it, please read him. He says, I know I exist because I can think. I can see myself in reflection in a mirror, etc. But that knowing by itself is not enough. Physical structure is not important. Important thing is, inner being. And that is where I have what's called the reflective process. When you learn certain things and you go and reflect upon it and cultivate your personality based upon your thinking, reflection, and accumulation of knowledge skills combined with experiential learnings. These are conventional approaches with focus on competence performance, but this is where you have these certain things. And he talked about the loops. I wish he was there. He had anyway. I've got the gist of the matter. Now, what is needed is that in developing your personality, you have certain triple loops that come. The Professor John Sanders has also written this chapter about triple loop system. It calls for an ontological turn in medical education. Recognizing your professional identity, it is based upon knowing and doing, but also on becoming, being and becoming. It's not just a question of knowing as a person that you're Dr. Shabih Zaidi or you're Dr. Nazia Yusuf Abidi or your Dr. Gohar. That's not enough. You also know what exactly inside your system, your zamir, your conscience, etc. Knowing and doing with the fact that being and becoming. So if the deficiencies that you present, personalities you develop through a certain loop system, and it's called triple loop. The first loop, and I'll just read it because it's very complex. This perspective aligns with the triple loop learning, which moves beyond refining action. Single loop is you improve your actions, or reassessing exceptions, which means reflection on your activities. That's called double loop. And then you go towards the stage which is called transformative, separate. That is, you've developed, you've done certain experiments, work, etc., knowledge and skills. You know what you're talking about. You reassure yourself by critical thinking, but also improve your quality of work. And that comes through self-reflection and redefinition of your core values, beliefs, identity. Such learning fosters this combination of single loop, double loop, and triple loop. That is, knowing certain thing, applying that thing, and reflecting upon it with a view to improve yourself is a process which is important for professional identity and development of an identity. And this is what he said. He sent me only yesterday. It's fantastic. The single loop is what, double loop is how, and triple loop is where you ask yourself. First is you know what's happening, then of course you know how you're doing it, then you know why you're doing it, and why means that you understand you being and becoming. It's a philosophy. Anyone who's interested in reading about these things, please read Mullah Sadra, Transcendental Philosophy, where we talk about being, existence, and existentialism. Like talk about Jean-Paul Sartre, he's done the same thing. Many philosophers. I don't want to go into it because it's beyond the scope of this talk. But these are triple loops which are helpful in developing a human personality as a professional person. Single loop, what are you doing? Second is reflecting on how you're doing it. The third loop is why you're doing it. Why you're doing means that you want to understand the deeper meaning of that particular action as a professional, your character. And that is what builds. If you do not have professional identity, I think I mentioned it here, and this reflective practice, embedding these reflective ontological practice into medical education can help learners form identities that are deeply internalized, ethically grounded, and continually evolving. A person with no identity, a professional with no identity, is like a salute in a crowd at sundown. So if you go to the beach and look at the sun sitting there, people, you see all their salutes, so you cannot differentiate them. What color, creed, race, etc. It likes a salute. So you're lost in that crowd. You must develop your professional identity using this 3-loop system. First loop is what you're doing it. Second loop is why you're doing it. Third is you should understand. The second is thinking about it, reflecting upon it. Third is why you're doing it, being and becoming. These are philosophical debates that perhaps leave it to another time. Now, this is my favorite word, or phronesis. It means basically practical wisdom. This is a word from Platonic philosophy. Aristotle actually expanded it, but it started, Plato was the first who talked about phronesis. That means practical wisdom. Aristotle expanded. He described phronesis as the virtue of practical wisdom as the capacity for discernment and judgment in difficult moral situations. This is what a doctor has to understand. Has to decisions that you make based upon certain characters, and those characters should be based upon practical wisdom. And practical wisdom comes upon knowing yourself, developing your personality, ontological, epistemological, cognitive domains. You apply all of them, and then you apply in your practical life. Think and think and think and improve your quality. And that is how you develop your personal identity. Experiential learning, that I keep saying all the time, is very important because it's a valuable virtue. It gives a physician a certain character and habitat and habitual disposition to make the right choices in complex clinical situations. This practically wise, therefore, what happens is that a practically wise professional person, health professional, etc., is often looked upon as the scholar, somebody who knows more than you, and it's because he has gained wisdom. He has gone from simple ontology to epistemology to why and being and understanding the basic fundamentals of personality. And remember that the patient is not a client, he's not a consumer, he's a patient. Patient is a patient. These days they're using, we use in NHS a patient is called a client. No, it's not a client. You may call it because of whatever reasons, but a patient is a patient. The virtue-based physician could never see his patients as a customer or consumer or a client, because that becomes commercialized, becomes a commodity. And I am one of the old-fashioned. I believe that a patient is a patient. Whatever you say, he's not a client, he's not a customer, he is your colleague, your friend, you must give. Anyway, so these are the important things you have to remember technologically. And the important thing is you cannot develop virtuous physician in one solitary, like a silo. You have to have complete development of the community in which one is working. And a virtuous physician would recognize that he is a member of a moral community, united with those other physicians. If they're not acting according to professional, it's your job. You should improve it because that communal welfare is developed, and you have a feeling that you're taking care of the sick and the unhealthy. They're not clients, they're not consumers, they are your patients, and you be careful about it. Now, the question is, can virtue be taught, and how so? That is an important factor, and that is where this is my favorite philosopher, McIntyre. He is remember, Plato died 2,000 years ago. He started virtue, etc., virtue theory, one of the theories of ethics. Then virtue theories passed away into oblivion. McIntyre revived it in the recent times, and he wrote a book called After Virtue. The virtuous physician cannot fully actualize his personal virtues unless there is a community of virtues to sustain and reinforce commitment to the virtues. McIntyre makes much of this in Smiler book. You should read this book called After Virtue. This is the reference. If you can read this, you'll find that the virtue, you will become a virtue-based physician. You'll acquire those characters that are there in your system.
The return of Osama General from Syria, Abu Bakr decided to lead an expedition against the apostates concentrated at Abra.
Thank you.
Abu Bakr was advised that instead of leading the expedition to Abra personally, he should entrust the command to someone else. His companion said, "O Caliph of the Holy Prophet, do not endanger yourself by loading this expedition in person. God forbid any harm comes to you, then that will..."
Let's see. Okay. We'll move on. Aristotle said that we learn by practice, and a good way could be to follow a model of a virtuous person. In medicine, this means we need virtuous physicians as teachers, And we follow our teachers. Remember the Hefferty's hidden curriculum that all of you are familiar with? We have role models. When you have role models who are good, then you acquire the habit. That is the best way. And hidden curriculum is a known thing for medical educators. Role models are important. They're the powerful forces in development of your character. Besides, certain ancillary education efforts can also shape the developing a physician, like the courses in medical ethics, humanities, and philosophy. I'm a strong believer, and I keep saying it, humanities should be taught as a subject in medical schools. Then human values, which are important, that can sensitize, raise awareness, and force critical reflection about the virtues of the good physician. Courses introduce students to a body of literature that gives evidence on importance of depth and complexity of the moral issues and commonplaces. And this you can do in a curriculum. You can have case-based discussion, longitudinal or cross-sectional studies, and you can have short discussions, problem-based learning as an educator. And you introduce philosophy as early as possible, not the whole philosophy, just the introduction of philosophy as to what is philosophy. Philosophy is a pleasure of mind. It's like food for your soul. If you learn to read philosophy, you will enjoy it thoroughly. I mean, it's such a joy. These days, there are so many audible books on philosophy. And I believe very strongly that ethics should be a part of a medical curriculum, because when you do that, the students will learn the things that they will be taught and they'll apply in day-to-day practice. The prime task of medical school is to prepare new physicians, but should be not only knowledge-based and skillful, but also should have the character, the third important limb of the triangle. Ethics or professionalism should be part of it. And that's important that you develop these things at the level of undergraduate studies. And that brings me to the topic, which is the modern topic, the topic that really is very challenging, very, very challenging, because now with the introduction of e-health and telehealth and teleeducation, remote training, virtual classrooms, flipped classrooms, micro-learning, these days, all these things are happening. And of course, AI has changed the complexion of the game altogether. Sakina, would you like to say a few things? Hello? Sakina, are you there?
Yes, I'm here. Sorry.
Yeah. Can you talk briefly about AI and things?
Yes. I know there was a really good question also on the chat by Dr. Amir. This is very, very important, because with social media and AI, it's become very easy to even not purposely, but spreading misinformation or targeting people. I know Dr. Amir said the social media and promoting videos of, or promoting doctors or the surgeons promoting themselves, but they forget who's watching it. There could be kids who are watching it. There could be elderly who are watching it. One of the examples that I use when I talk about social media is I have an 85-year-old aunt, and she gets these videos on doctors telling, oh, you should boil all these spices and drink in the morning. So she wakes up in the morning and she's putting all these spices in the water and making it boil and then drinking it. And then the next day she gets another video that says, oh, so you should add these more spices. So she's drinking these, but we don't know what effect is she going to have on her health. She is a heart patient. She has breathing issues. She has other health issues. What is that affecting? So the person who is promoting these videos is not keeping that in mind and spreading this information. And they are generations who are just taking it as their the word of a doctor and practicing it without thinking twice. So we have to be very, very careful when we post things like this. Yes, we are doing a good service. Yes, we might be thinking that, oh, this is the best thing. We are giving free information or free treatment or free advice. But we also have to keep in mind who is taking that advice and what effect do they have when they take your advice. And also the AI, it is very easy now to Google something and or especially if you are, say, writing a paper or writing about a topic, it's very easy with ChatGPT and AI to build it within seconds. But is that you have to be truthful to yourself. You have to be honest to yourself. Is this what you want to do? I can go ahead and write a paper on one of the medical topic, and I have no medical background, and I can publish it if I want. But I have to be true to myself. And also, being an IT professional, you have to, even if you're using AI, you start writing yourself first, then use AI to refine it. But once you refine it, read it once, twice, three times, because AI is using what information is out there free. And there might be misinformation. And you don't want to blindly use AI and publish something which may not be correct, because you will be responsible for what you put out. So please, please be very careful, analyze it, read it, think it through, and then use it. And when you are using AI to publish something, please do put a note saying this was generated by AI. This is being truthful and being true to yourself, because you have to make sure your conscience is clean. And if you have any questions, do let me know, please. I hope I covered everything, Dr. Shabih.
Can you briefly talk about tele-education that we're doing and telehealth? Are there any issues with it? I mean, that's also part of professionalism.
Yes, there is. Telehealth could be an issue because from my experience, once a doctor has to examine, so you cannot do telehealth for everything, right? So you have to pick and choose when you can do telehealth and when you cannot do telehealth. I don't have medical background, but I'm sure everybody who's listening on this webinar can agree that there are certain things that you would need to examine a patient. But telehealth is also very, very important. You are reaching rural areas, you're reaching places where the doctors are not available, you're treating patients that way, but you also have to keep in mind there are limitations to it.
Thank you. I think we'll move on because it's almost 40 minutes. This is a very important subject. How do you assess? Thank you, Sakina, once again. Assessment and evaluation of professionalism. That is a very, very difficult subject, very challenging. Every time we've done webinars on this, I've always invited Gaur Wajid to be here because he's an experienced person. And if we can just move on to the next slide, otherwise not moving.
You just click on the arrow. Yes.
Okay. So Dr. Sultan Arab Shahi wrote a wonderful chapter in a book that we published last year called Global Medical Education, published by Springer. And he mentions 4 points, and I invite Professor Gaur Wajid to come and dilate upon it and tell us more about it. See, professionalism that I've just mentioned these various attributes like dignity and competence and human values and culture, etc., sensitivity. But how do you assess them? There should be a formula. Like in knowledge and skills, we have certain parameters we do, like for example, OSCE, for example, or didactic lectures and discussions, or question answer, short question, etc. But something which is more like non-tangible, something that's sitting in your conscience, in your moral background somewhere there. How do you assess that? And these are things that I'm borrowing this slide from Dr. Arab Shahi's, well, not borrowing, I've harvested from his lecture, his chapter. Direct observation, certain elements that you can do is altruism, which is about professionalism, trust, patient interest, patient autonomy, social justice, very important factor, responsibility to patients. These you can observe. And then the second item is altruism. You can do simulation, trust, etc. And then I'll just talk about these two and then over to Professor Gaur Wajid. Then you can also have listening, trustworthiness, answering directly, spec, role modeling, all these things you can do, evaluation, different things. But how do you do that? That is where Professor Gohar Wajid has to come in. Professor Wajid, are you there? Please come over and dilate on and tell us about assessment and evaluation of professionalism.
Thank you so much, sir. I will very briefly talk about a few dimensions of professionalism that relate to assessment that relate to the assessment of professionalism. In order to develop an assessment plan for a soft skill or whatever you call it, there is diversity in the way people call it. Some call it non-technical skills, non-core skills, or soft skills compared to the technical skills. You need to keep in mind firstly the overall assessment plan that is being followed and the assessment policy that is being followed for the overall curriculum, because you cannot assess professionalism in isolation compared to the other aspects that you are assessing. Number two, very important point is that professionalism itself is a combination of so many soft skills, like Professor Zaidi said he wanted to include ethics in professionalism, altruism, accountability, trustworthiness, truthfulness. You need to very carefully identify and define the aspects of professionalism that particularly go in the definition of the professionalism in your own particular context and culture. For example, professionalism in the Arabian context, in Islamic context, in particular context of maybe Indo-Pak or Western concepts of professionalism are quite different than the Eastern concepts. So you need to very well define and see what you need to inculcate in your students. Only then you can define those methods that you need to incorporate in your assessment scheme that will be able to produce the most valid and reliable assessment method. There is no one fixed method that you can apply. It has to be a combination of methods. And since the very attribute of professionalism is longitudinality, it is something that you cannot inculcate in overnight in the students. It is longitudinal, and you have something like 5 years to inculcate professionalism. So you can think of something like the very first thing I would say, thinking in terms of self-assessment and developing those reflective practice skills among students. Then the workplace-based assessment tools and techniques in terms of how much weight you are going to give to summative assessment and formative assessment, and what dimensions of formative assessment, how you are going to provide formal and informal feedbacks to the students. Then something techniques like direct observation or 360-degree feedback, portfolios. I'm big admirer of portfolios that can play a very important role in the development of professionalism. There are so many studies about it. Other assessment tools like standardized patients and veneers and scenarios, and even objective structured clinical assessment methods. And I'm sure for knowledge-based tests and MCQs can play a role in assessing the knowledge and description of professionalism. So the overall context that need to be very well defined, the definition of professionalism, how it would be assessed in the particular assessment policy of the curriculum, and the teachers must be trained on to the methods, especially formative assessment, and how to give feedback and how to develop reflective practices among students. I would end it here. Thank you so much for providing me this opportunity.
Thank you, sir. Very kind, always very generous with time and your knowledge. And this is what we want you to know as to how do you assess. Because I briefly discussed about the process of invoking professionalism today. We've discussed in the past definitions and various models and patient-doctor relationship, etc., etc. But this was today about invoking professionalism. And basically what I said in the discussion, which was then further augmented by Sakina's brief talk about the tele things and Professor Wajid's on assessment and evaluation, that professionalism it's an inseparable component of the health profession. Its main attributes focus on character building. That is where virtue ethics comes. That means you develop a certain trait. To feed a hungry cat once in a while is everybody does that. That is a very common. But to do it every time you see a hungry cat, that is your character. It builds up into your system intuitively. That is, you do not think about it, helping a blind person crossing the road. These are the virtues. You develop the character within yourself of compassion and integrity and honesty and all the values that we just briefly discussed. And that is important. That character building is what is important. You build a character of person, so you automatically altruism and compassion and generosity and knowledge sharing and they automatically come into the system into action whenever a person is exposed to a certain challenge in practical life. Now, what is important as these the conclusions, so the take-home message is that we should try and inculcate professionalism in health professionals, whether it's by teaching or by inculcating through involvement of the curricula or discussions and case-based studies, etc., or through certain courses or lectures, webinars, etc., like this one. That's entirely up to you. This is where I'll end and open the forum for debate and discussion. I see very learned scholars like Zaidi with such an experience in surgical training. Maybe he'd like to share and tell us more about professionalism. Dr. Zaidi, Mr. Zaidi, are you there or you disappeared? Anyone else who would like to participate in the debate or discussion, you're welcome. I see a lot of people. Saima, do you want to add something? Come on, let's hear from people. Ehsan Zaidi is there. Asked him. Dr. Ehsan, do you want to say something about your experience of training? Not interested. All right.
Which is very well covered.
No, but I think somebody has. We should have discussion. Amna, you want to say something?
I think Dr.
Come on.
Sir, I'm Dr. Kamal Shigli, sir.
Okay, welcome.
Yes, sir. Sir, so what I meant is that this thanks for covering up this topic, because in our daily routine of covering up with the knowledge and the curriculum, this is one aspect which is getting very much neglected. And as you rightly said, that we are very much not aware, and also the assessment and all is quite critical, and that's what was stated, that you cannot have a single method. So thanks for taking up this important topic, sir. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Kamal. Baha, would you like to add anything? I was hoping that Tariq will be here from your institute. Baha is a very senior medical educator in Iraq. Let's learn from you. I fail to understand the shyness in professional people. There's such powerful knowledge, strong, they can speak so well, etc. Anyway, if not, then I think we'll conclude it, because it's always a difficult subject. These are subjects that we need to expand more. We should involve more scholars, philosophers, thinkers, and we should learn from them as to the nuances of various human values, because what is happening is the medical profession, with the development of various technological advances, etc., the human touch is lost. And that is what I've written in one of the chapters in the book that's coming up, that AI is excellent. We should use it, and I'm a great, great supporter of activity that we should use technology like AI or whatever systems are coming up, but with care, with caution, with ethics, because let it not become your master. It should be your either subordinate or your friend. What is also important is that we should not ignore technology, because technology is here. And the other day I had a meeting, I think we'll take it. The other day I had a meeting with a professor here in St. Mary's, who was a professor of medical education and AI. And when I talked to him, I was flabbergasted, because he says that you cannot imagine what changes are coming up in the next 5 years. This medicine that we've been teaching or learning or promoting is obsolete. It's already obsolete. It says all these things are gone. AI has taken over. And in fact, we can see in practical life, radiology, for example, dermatology, even cardiology, to say, they're taken over by AI. Knowledge base has gone totally different. We cannot keep pace with the knowledge explosion. Skills we can still make. Skills also, robotic surgery has become a normal thing. And what is happening is the modern technology. So when you talk to these people who are experts in AI, etc., professionalism becomes more important, because unless you have the moral values, unless you have the built-in system of your virtue-based character, you will probably fall a prey to all these technologies and create. See, if the AI technology and all these modern technologies fall in the hands of evil person, then the whole thing. See, the whole concept is it's not the fault of the knife. The knife is there as a tool, whether used for slicing an apple or cutting somebody's throat. It is the person who is using important. And that person, if he's a professional, he must know the moral values, must know the limitations to use them. And I think I've got somebody who's Dr. Amir.
Dr. Amir.
Yeah, please ask him to.
Assalamu alaikum, Prof. You hear me all?
Yep.
Yes, go ahead.
All right. Prof, just want to ask, yes, professionalism is very important in, like, we talk about the curriculum 20-25 years ago. There was no such professionalism included in the curriculum. Now, in this new era, they start coming up. At what year we should start for them to teaching the professionalism, right? We cannot assume the doctors, since they are becoming doctors, so they are professional. They should be taught definitely. So in which year we should start teaching them? Some curriculum, some universities they start them teaching in the year 5, which I feel that it's a bit late, Shabih.
Oh, I think it's late. My answer is very simple, and I've said it before also. And I said it many, many years ago in Pakistan Medical and Dental Council, when I used to be one of the members of the Executive Council, some 40 years ago. I said it to the higher authorities that do not teach zoology and botany, teach humanities. How would the cutting of a frog or a rabbit help you in becoming a surgeon? I fail to understand. We were made to dissection of the rabbits. Let's say, why? That's a different anatomy altogether. Humanities is what should be taught. We should be teaching how to be a human being. That is never taught in our high schools. So answer to your question is that not in medical school, we should start teaching humanities and social sciences and ethics and a touch of philosophy in the higher schools at just, what's called GCSE in the UK. And in the UK, it's become a mandatory thing now. Not mandatory, but you have 3 subjects, for example, for A-level. Usually people take one extra subject as philosophy as something to help in their medical curriculum. I know some people in my family who've done that. Children, they really are different persons altogether. If you talk to them, you cannot talk to them. They're so knowledgeable because their foundation is grounded in philosophy and ethics. And I see it all the time around me. So I'm a strong believer that should be taught at very early, pre-medical school level. But at the medical school, we should, and this is what is happening in the UK, I'm sure it's happening in other countries also, you start introduction at the first year level. Introduction to medical ethics as one module, for example, just very basic thing about 4 basic principles: autonomy, beneficence, non-beneficence, justice, and then build upon case discussion, problem-based learning, dilemmas that you see all the time in clinical practice. You can do longitudinally, right across 5 years, gradually build it up. And that is what must be done. It should be done now, because, recently I was thrown a question by a professor, Professor Hurst in Harvard or somewhere, that the porcine heart that was used by one of the surgeons, is it ethically, legally, and religiously allowed or not? Very difficult question to answer. I could not answer. So I told him that let's discuss and debate. So he gathered 10 scholars from different countries, religious and non-religious. And we had a debate, and we published a paper recently that there is a thing called the Arura. That means if there is a Zarura, basically, it's Zarura in Arabic. That means if there is nothing available, if you know no other alternatives available, then poker and heart can be used and can legal and ethical. And this is the debate which but these are difficult things. But these challenges are faced by physicians every day. Very simple question. Somebody's got brain dead, and you're the physician in charge. Whether you should switch off the ventilator or not, who will decide it? And how will you determine the parameters? Somebody has to teach, and you learn by experience. And you have to be taught as case-based discussion, problem-based learning, dilemmas in practical life, and start from first year and go on throughout your career. Not just 5 years, throughout your life. Every day you learn. Yes, Muhammad Asif?
Yes, Assalamu alaikum, sir. I'm Dr. Asif from Gujranwala, Pakistan. I have a comment. There is a wonderful talk, as usual, by a legend. I think I always learn from you in the previous course of diploma, and also there is continuous ongoing learning in your part, and we are humble learner from a legend, a teacher, a role model. My question here is certain other attributes. These are discussed in the professionalism, that is trustworthiness, altruism, and advocacy. So what are these terms in actual sense? And what is work ethics? Kindly briefly revise us about these terminologies.
Well, altruism in Urdu is isar. Sacrifice, not sacrifice. Altruism is slightly different to sacrifice. Isar. Isar and Qurbani. Remember Isar and Qurbani? Qurbani is sacrifice. Isar is where you're doing something. For example, you have a thing that you want to share with somebody, you want to do something more like sympathetic approach, helping. Like kidney donation, which organ donation is very common. That is altruism. And that's a very common thing. Work ethics is a subject in its own right. And I've covered it. Dr. Kaharwajid has also covered it. And I think we have YouTube available. I'll ask Sakina to share the video with you. Work ethics got so many factors, starting from workplace harassment to whistleblowing, to cognitive factors related with work ethics, to applied work ethics. There's so many factors. So I can't cover it like this, but we have covered in one of the discussions. Compassion, of course, compassion, like Raham, that everybody knows, but it's nothing. What's the other thing? Accountability. Who should know better than a Pakistani about accountability? Less said, the better. With sincere apologies. So these are things that I think everybody knows. These are simple words. If you Google them, you'll find the answers. But the applied forms are seen like altruism. Best example is that of a kidney donation. Somebody does it. That is altruism, for example. All right?
What about the advocacy?
Advocacy of health professionals is exactly like what we're doing now. This is advocacy, that we're promoting it. We're promoting the concept of professionalism in health professionals. You're advocating your cause. Our cause is to be professional, to be gentle, to be humble, to be polite, to be compassionate, and you promote your cause. Everybody has different causes. Advocacy, you're advocating a certain cause. Advocacy, you're pleading for. In my case, I'm pleading for professionalism. I'm pleading for using or teaching ethics right across the curriculum. That is kind of advocacy. But advocacy is in different things, like, for example, medical profession. When you go for residency program, there is an advocacy program where it tells you how to approach medical profession. Advocacy is like advocation. Advocate means advocate. You know about it, how to promote, how to plead for, how to present a case. In my case, I'm doing that for ethics.
Sir, the work ethics are also included in professionalism, or it is sometimes it is another.
No, it's a part of professionalism. Work ethics is a subject within professionalism. Professionalism, like I said, in the triangle of education, you have knowledge and skills. So you're running these together, but they're falling in the center, there's no connection. That connection, which they call behavior and attitude, is actually professionalism. And that word behavior is very irritating. Everybody has behavior. Everybody behaves in medical practice. It ought to be professional. I've been saying it for many years. That's a wrong terminology. Behavior, attitude, values, it does not justify its existence. It's professionalism. So when you have knowledge and skills, you combine it with professionalism. Within that domain, you have all these factors you mentioned and work ethics. And if you want, I'll be happy to share with you some material on work ethics separately. Don't worry.
Okay, thank you very much, sir. So nice, sir.
That's very kind. You're very kind. And I think, Sakina, over to
Anybody
you.
else? Any questions, comments? Okay, thank you everyone for joining. This was a very enlightening discussion. And I hope to see you guys all again. Inshallah, in 2 weeks, October 25th, we will have a simulation workshop. There are 2 parts, and this would be the first one. And I will send out the flyer and registration because it's got a limit on how many participants we can have. So please look out for that. And if there are any questions, concerns, you know how to reach us. Take care. Thank you.
Thank you, Sakina. Thank you, everybody. Bye-bye.